This program recounts a turbulent era in American history. Some of the language used may be objectionable. Viewer discretion is advised.
In the early 1960s, the civil rights movement was gaining ground. The idea of two separate Americas, one black and one white, had become unacceptable to many, and the vision of racial equality emerged.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
But in the South, Dr. King's dream represented a threat to a racially divided society, and its leaders weren't giving up without a fight.
I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
One of the pillars of the segregated South were its sports, and college football was king. An African American had never played in their legendary stadiums against their beloved teams, until one young man from Washington, D.C. sought to be the first.
Football in the South was a religion. And the football arenas and stadiums were the temples where they practiced this religion and worshiped this God of football. And so they saw me as a Negro, back in those days as they called us, as desecrating their temple.
This is the story of one young man and one university that changed the face of college sports forever.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darryl Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
By the time he was 19 years old, Washington, D.C. native Darryl Hill had gotten used to being a trailblazer. He was the first African-American football player at Gonzaga High School in D.C. and the first at Navy as well, starring alongside Roger Staubach on a nationally ranked freshman team in 1961. But after deciding the regimented academy life wasn't for him, Hill was about to embark on a journey that would make college football history.
I grew up in the 50s, so I grew up in an era, where blacks were somewhat second-class citizens and sort of suppressed, both by the majority community and so in themselves. Blacks had a jaundiced view of their place in the world. So the 60s was a very heady time. It was an emergence.
As Hill began his search for a new place to play, the landscape of college athletics was much different than it is today. 3 major conferences, the ACC, the SEC, and the Southwest Conference, had yet to integrate their major sports. But with the blessing of school president Wilson Elkins, Maryland head football coach Tom Nugent decided the time had come to recruit the ACC's first black player.
He said, "I just come back from President Elkins, and we have decided to recruit the first African-American football player ever to play in Atlantic Coast Conference." And I said, "Ooh, that's good." And he said, "And you're the man that's going to find him."
As Maryland assistant Lee Corso began his search, one name immediately jumped to the top of the list.
I don't tell anybody, but my goal was to get Darryl Hill, the kid from the Naval Academy. So I go in and see my boss one day, and he says, "What do you think?" I said, "I think one of the things we got to do is we got to let everybody know we're interested so I can get some candidates." So the next day in the paper it says, "Maryland to break color barrier or whatever to recruit first black athlete." And then an hour after the paper went, I get a phone call. It's Mrs. Hill. I said, "Yo, God, thank you."
I was being courted by, the usual suspects in the North, Penn State, Michigan State, Syracuse, and Corso shows up. And he says, "Yeah, well, we want you to consider coming to Maryland." And I said, "Well, you forgot what conference you're in, didn't you?" So, he said, "Well, that's just the point." And I remember saying to him, "Well, that's all good, Lee, but I'm not Jackie Robinson."
But Hill eventually relented, realizing that he was the right person at the right time to integrate the ACC.
It did occur to me, somebody said that you don't have an option here. You're the right guy, and you owe it to your race and your people to do this. It may be another 2 or 3 years before they bring another black forward.
Here's a guy that's smart enough to go to the Naval Academy, right? He's got the leadership college that the Naval Academy wants. He's been through the prep school. He's been through the plebes. Hello, What kind of a study do I have to make? This is a guy that was perfect. He was like God had placed him right there to be the kid to do this position.
Coming up, Darryl Hill fights to gain acceptance from the home fans at Maryland.
And there comes Darryl across the middle, whoosh, catches it, boom, touchdown. We beat the Air Force Academy. The crowd went wild. I think that was the moment that everybody said, whew, this guy's a hell of a football player, and we don't care if he's an African-American, Ethiopian, or what the hell he is. This guy can play.
And on the road, Darryl comes face to face with the realities of segregation when his mother is denied admission to Maryland's game at Clemson.
They wouldn't let her in the stadium. She had a ticket, but they didn't admit blacks. The blacks had to watch the game outside the stadium on a dirt hill called Nigger Hill. I'll never will forget that.
This program recounts a turbulent era in American history. Some of the language used may be objectionable. Viewer discretion is advised.
Coach Tom Nugent's decision to recruit the ACC's first black football player wasn't popular among Maryland alumni, and Darryl Hill's reception in College Park was chilly at first. But in his 5th game with the Terps, he began to win over the home fans.
The Air Force Academy is undefeated, nationally ranked. They just beat Nebraska, and they come into College Park. And we had a 2-minute drill, and I was the offensive coordinator, so I had a special play for Darryl. And there comes Darryl across the middle, whoosh, catches it, boom, touchdown. We beat the Air Force Academy. The crowd went wild. I think that was the moment that everybody said, whew, this guy's a hell of a football player, and we don't care if he's an African-American, Ethiopian, or what the hell he is. This guy can play.
My first couple of games, I wasn't booed at home, but I wasn't cheered with a lot of enthusiasm. That changed the attitude, but it wasn't all hugs and kisses when I got here.
One of the people who befriended Hill from the start was teammate Jerry Fishman, Maryland's only Jewish player. Fishman had dealt with his own share of prejudice and was sensitive to Hill's situation.
When Darryl and I got together, he being the only black in the whole school almost, and me being the only Jewish football player, one of the few to ever play at Maryland, we both had a natural bonding inclination. We both knew what it was like.
He was a middle linebacker, had a mean streak in him. He was big and athletic, and he was quick, to step in the face of racism, whether it be, anti-Semitism or against, African Americans. One day we were down in Durham, in a 5 and dime.
And they said, we don't serve niggers in here. And I said, well, we don't eat them, so how about just a couple of sodas?
Fishman got the team up, and he's captain, moved everybody out, said, let's go. And then he went down the counter and knocked every dish and salsa and glass into the floor, Of course, there was a big hubbub about that, and the team had to chip in to pay for the dishes, but, it was worth it.
On the road in the ACC, Hill was the subject of constant racial abuse from opposing fans. One incident at Clemson caused Hill to walk off the field before the game even started.
Somewhere along the line, one of the managers comes and gets me, takes me to the side gate. There's my mother standing out there. They wouldn't let her in the stadium. She had a ticket, but they didn't admit blacks. The blacks had to watch the game outside the stadium on a dirt hill called Nigger Hill. I'll never will forget that. And so she couldn't come in, and it was homecoming. There was 50,000 drunk, Southern gentlemen just waiting. and I said, no, this is too volatile a situation. I went back to the locker room, put my uniform, put my clothes back on, and was going to take my mother out. Somehow, the president of Clemson, the chancellor, gets wind of this and comes down, takes my mother to his box. And so I entered the game. When I got dressed again, the game had started. My mother winds up spending the night with the chancellor and his wife at their house, and they stayed friends, until he died, I think.
Up next, Hill suffers more abuse at Wake Forest until Demon Deacon star Brian Piccolo steps in.
Piccolo just comes over and puts his arms around my shoulder and walks me toward the Wake Forest cheering section. Boy, you know, that just cut everything off.
And Darryl Hill's success leads to another first, as Maryland's Billy Jones integrates ACC basketball.
My thought was, why can't I? I never thought about breaking any barriers, but why can't I? I have good grades, why can't I? And that's where I was.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darryl Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
During the 1963 season, Darryl Hill endured countless taunts and indignities while integrating ACC football. But it was the fans, not opposing players, who were the culprits. And one player in particular earned Hill's undying gratitude with an unforgettable gesture of friendship. His name was Brian Piccolo, whose friendship with African-American running back Gale Sayers was immortalized in the movie Brian's Song.
The Wake Forest fans were particularly nasty. And they had organized racial cheers, you know, and this was going on in the pregame. And Piccolo just comes over and puts his arms around my shoulder and walks me toward the Wake Forest cheering section. Boy, you know, that just cut everything off. And then you got to remember, I mean, he was their greatest hero, the best football player that ever played at Wake. You know, he was like all everything. And he ran a risk during that time of being ostracized for befriending an African American. That was not acceptable behavior. So, you know, I never saw him again. But, you know, every time I see the movie, you know, I get a little tear in my eye, because the guy really was what he looked like in that movie, at least from my perspective.
Hill's success on the football field and in the classroom led Maryland to integrate ACC basketball. 2 years after Hill debuted with the Terps, basketball coach Bud Milliken recruited Towson High School's Billy Jones, who was ready to blaze a trail of his own.
My father never had the opportunity to play college park. There were some great players I grew up with in Baltimore, never had a chance to play it at the same level that I did. Choices, Morgan State, some other place, or stretch out and go to College Park, even go to Michigan, but they have black players in the Big Ten. You're not making the same impact, but you could start something if you go here, and Milligan sold me on that idea. And I did feel if I go there and do the right things, other people will come here, okay, if I do the right things. But I cannot go there, be a good player, and act the fool off the court. I cannot go there and get in trouble academically. I want my degree. So I was focused. I want a mission here. Jones
was aided in that mission by his coaches and teammates at Maryland, as well as Darryl Hill, who knew the pitfalls Jones might face along the way.
Darryl was a good student, and if nothing else, I picked it up from Darryl. Just be serious about your academics. You don't go to Naval Academy unless you're a very good student. Stay focused, and that's what I learned from Darryl. The incidents and what have you, we both knew what's out there, the dangers out there, so we didn't have to talk a lot about that. It was more or less, what do you do to be successful?
While Jones dealt with some of the same taunts that Hill did, there were also encouraging moments along the way, when the significance of what he was doing became clear.
We were in sophomore year, we're in New Orleans, and we're in a restaurant there, and I didn't know the history of the restaurant. We're sitting there in our black jackets on the whole deal, and out of the kitchen, one by one, comes the chefs. They come over, walk through everybody else, walk over, shake my hand, nod it, and they walk off. 2 minutes later, here comes another, just 4 or 5 times, and they just thought I just knew everybody. They didn't get it. The players didn't get it. I really didn't understand it either until later I thought about it. They were acknowledging the fact that they don't typically serve blacks. And they were acknowledging the fact I was there, I'm in uniform, looked like everybody else, and it's out of due respect, I thought. And that was constant. People were acknowledging the fact that you're doing something that looks a little bit different.
Ahead, Darryl Hill discusses why he faced so much hostility while integrating ACC football.
They saw me as a Negro, back in those days, as they called us, as desecrating their temple. You know, so it was more of my playing on the field than playing against their players. It was the field, it was the stadium that was at issue here.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darryl Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
In integrating the ACC's marquee sports, Billy Jones and Darryl Hill dealt with harassment from opposing fans. But away from the stadiums and arenas, their coaches did their best to shield them from discrimination.
I'm still finding out things now, that he had to do that, he kept from me. They wouldn't register me. I mean, even after the university said they were going to accept me, when I went, to the registration, the registrar, whoever that was, took it upon herself or himself to say, cause some technical reason not to do this, So Nugent, they had to fight through all of that kind of stuff. He and his staff did a fairly good job of not having that heaped up on my shoulders.
I did not know until 2000, year 2000, we had a reunion for Coach Milligan back at College Park. And it was somebody acknowledged the fact that he had done some things that I was not aware of. We were in Durham, and we're in the hotel lobby. And we think we have our bags, we're getting our bags off the bus, we think we're checking in. All of a sudden, we put our bags back on the bus and we leave, okay? I never thought of it. You're getting gum and chips or what have you, you're not really paying attention to what's going on. The reality is, I couldn't stay there. They would not accept me, so Milligan packed the entire team up and he moved the team. It also happened at a train station once where we couldn't be served. I couldn't be served. But Milligan moved, I did not know the decision had been made. All I know is we have a change of plans, we're moving here. So Bud shielded me from a lot of things. And I found out, almost 40 years later, what did transpire.
In football, Hill wasn't the first African American ever to play against some of the ACC schools. Occasionally, teams went north and faced teams with African American players. But he was the first to invade their turf. And to those who lived it, that's the reason Hill faced so much resistance while integrating the ACC.
I think it was about not so much that Darryl was black, but the South was being forced to accept somebody that they didn't want to accept. They didn't want to be told, you have to do anything. And this is the same story it is today. People just don't want to be told, you have to do something. Well, this is our stadium, this is our state, this is how we choose to live, and we don't care to have a player, black, white, or red, forced upon us.
Football in the South was a religion. And the football arenas and stadiums were the temples where they practiced this religion and worshiped this God of football. And so they saw me as a Negro, back in those days as they called us, as desecrating their temple. So it was more of my playing on the field than playing against their players. It was the field, it was the stadium that was at issue here.
Up next, a look at Darryl Hill's legacy and the integration of college sports in the South.
There were no black football players in the South. Michael Jordan and all these great black athletes, they eventually would have played. But Darryl was the first one to open that door, and it wasn't easy.
Black Man, White Field. The story of Maryland's Darryl Hill. Made possible in part by Toyota. That's moving forward.
Looking back, the integration of ACC athletics seems like it was inevitable. But at the time, in 1963, the success of integration was anything but a sure thing. A fact Darryl Hill knew all too well.
The ACC waited 3 years before they brought another black, and Maryland waited till I was a senior. So they watched. It wasn't like a slam dunk. I kind of laughed, because sometime maybe about, 10, 15 years later, Clemson University won the national NCAA championship, #1 ranked team in the country. And I looked at that day when they played in the Orange Bowl, and every single player was black. Even the quarterback, on both sides of the ball.
If you look at the coaches in Atlantic Coast Conference in basketball, half the coaches are black. So that's even more overwhelming to me, and therefore today's athlete, they have no idea there was a Darryl Hill, there was a Billy Jones, there was the University of Maryland years ago with the things we dealt with. They don't have a clue in that regard because it looks so differently now.
And the man who started the ball rolling, integrating ACC athletics, was the late coach Tom Nugent, who decided the time had come for a young black man to play for the Terps.
He was an innovator, not only in football, but off the field too. See, he was a visionary. He was seeing how the future was going to go, and he wanted to be a part of that because he thought basically it was the right thing to do, and why not him at Maryland? And he had the president backing him, and he decided to do it. And obviously it was not well taken by the alumni at the University of Maryland at the time. There was a lot of reaction to it.
You must have courage somebody in football, Tom Nugent, Lee Corso, whomever the decision makers were there, had the courage to kind of step out and be bold. And in essence, they put their coaching careers on the line. And I know Milligan put his on the line for recruiting me.
As for Darryl Hill, it's hard to overstate his role. Before he came to Maryland, an African American had never played football or basketball at a Division I college in the Deep South. By stepping foot in those stadiums and refusing to back down in the face of bigotry, Hill changed the landscape of college athletics forever.
People don't even realize the significance of it. There were no black football players in the South. Michael Jordan and all these great black athletes, they eventually would have played. But Darryl was the first one to open that door, and it wasn't easy.
This was unnecessary, laborious efforts to try to maintain this separate society, and it was distasteful. And I think the heart of America wanted it over with, and I think everybody breathes a sense of relief when it was done. Well, in football, like I said, in the South was a very important institution. So I think, by integrating football, I helped move things in a positive direction, quicker than maybe if I had not played football. So that's the legacy that I look back on.